you finally said no. And somehow you felt bad for it. It wasn't a cruel no. It wasn't cold. It was honest, necessary, long overdue. But the silence that followed felt heavy, like you'd done something wrong. Your chest tightened. Your mind replayed the moment. You wondered if you hurt them. You wondered if you overreacted. You started apologizing in your head for something that didn't need an apology. That's the trap. They've conditioned you to believe that peace is selfish and self-respect is cruelty. They taught you to associate love with sacrifice and acceptance with surrender. So every time you choose yourself, your nervous system panics because it was trained to see self-worth as rebellion. They don't get angry because you said no. They get angry because you stopped being their yes. They don't miss your presence. They miss your compliance. And that's why guilt hits hardest right after growth. Guilt becomes the leash that pulls you back into patterns you already outgrew. It whispers, "You're being unkind. You're too much. You've changed." And you start to believe it, because it sounds like your own voice. But that voice isn't truth. It's programming. It's what happens when emotional manipulation feels like connection. When you've been rewarded for pleasing, punished for boundaries, and praised for disappearing just enough to make others comfortable. The guilt isn't proof that you're wrong. It's proof that you're healing. It's the ache that comes when the old version of you realizes it's being replaced. So stop feeling sorry for saying no. Stop apologizing for needing peace. You didn't betray anyone. You just stopped betraying yourself. Because some people don't want you balanced. They want you bending. They don't want your boundaries. They want your silence. And when you finally stop giving it, they'll call it selfishness. But that's only because they were fed by your self-sacrifice. You're not cruel. You're clear. You're not distant. You're finally at peace. And peace doesn't require an apology. They guilt you because guilt works. It's the most efficient form of emotional control. Invisible, quiet, and familiar. They don't need to shout. They just have to make you feel bad for doing what's right for you. They've learned that if they can trigger your guilt, they can rewrite your truth. They can turn your boundaries into accusations, your peace into punishment, your clarity into cruelty. That's how they win. Not by force, but by emotion. They don't control you with anger. They control you with disappointment. They sigh instead of shout. They go quiet instead of arguing. They let the silence do the work, because they know you'll fill it with apologies. Guilt is their favorite tool because it wears your face. It sounds like your own conscience. It disguises itself as empathy, as love, as being considerate. But it's not compassion, it's conditioning. They'll twist your empathy until it turns into compliance. They'll say, "I thought you cared." They'll say, "You've changed." They'll say, "Wow, I didn't expect that from you." Each word is designed to sting, not because it's true, but because they know your heart can't stand being misunderstood. And that's how guilt traps good people. It targets the kind-hearted, the aware, the ones who care too deeply. Because you're easy to manipulate when you hate the idea of hurting someone. They know your compassion is your weak spot. They know you'd rather carry pain than cause it. So they weaponize that softness. They make you feel responsible for their emotions. They act wounded when you simply draw a line. They play the victim when you finally protect yourself. It's a performance, rehearsed, practiced, perfected, and it works until you learn to recognize the script. They don't call you selfish because you are. They call you selfish because you stopped serving their comfort. They don't call you cold because you're unkind. They call you cold because you've become immune to their manipulation. They don't say, "You've changed," because you're worse. They say it because they can't benefit from you the same way anymore. Understand this. People who truly love you feel safe when you express your limits. It helps them trust you. It helps the connection stay clean and real. But people who use you feel threatened when you set boundaries. Because every time you say no, you remind them that they never actually owned you. They'll project their discomfort back onto you. They'll use guilt as camouflage to hide the truth that they were taking more than they were giving. Guilt is their defense mechanism against accountability. They'd rather make you feel wrong than admit they've crossed a line. Because guilt keeps you explaining, apologizing, shrinking. And as long as you're explaining, they never have to change. So when they guilt you for saying no, don't rush to defend yourself. Pause. Notice the game. Ask yourself, who benefits from this guilt? Whose comfort am I protecting? You'll realize the answer is never you. And that's when you start to reclaim your power. Because once you see guilt as a tool, you stop mistaking it for truth. You stop mistaking manipulation for morality. You stop believing that peace must be earned through pain. They can only control you through guilt if you believe that love must always cost you something. But it doesn't. Real love respects boundaries. It doesn't need to guilt you to keep you close. It doesn't punish you for choosing rest, silence, or solitude. So the next time someone calls you selfish for setting limits, hear what they're really saying. You stopped letting me use you. And that's not cruelty. That's healing. You don't owe anyone your exhaustion. You don't owe anyone your guilt. And you certainly don't owe anyone an explanation for protecting your peace. You weren't born feeling guilty for saying no. You were trained to. Since the beginning, the message was subtle. Be agreeable. Be polite. Be good. Good meant quiet. Good meant obedient. Good meant selfless to the point of disappearance. As a child, you learned that love wasn't given freely. It was earned. Earned by pleasing. Earned by yielding. Earned by never making anyone uncomfortable. You said yes when you wanted to say no. You smiled when you wanted to cry. You apologized for existing in the wrong tone. And every time you complied, you were rewarded. With approval, with affection, with temporary peace. But peace that depends on your silence isn't peace. It's submission. And somewhere along the way, that submission became your identity. When you were loud, they said you were too much. When you were honest, they said you were ungrateful. When you cried, they said, "Stop being dramatic." And when you set a boundary, they said, "You've changed." So you adjusted. You learned to read every room before speaking. You measured your tone, your words, your emotions. Because someone once made you believe that your truth was a burden. That's where the guilt was planted. In the small moments when your needs were met with disappointment. In the sighs, the looks, the pauses. In the emotional withdrawal that followed every attempt to assert yourself. You started to connect boundaries with loss. Every time you spoke up, love felt further away. So you began to equate silence with safety. And you mistook self-abandonment for kindness. You learned that saying no brings tension, that protecting yourself leads to distance. That peace for you often means discomfort for others. And that discomfort feels unbearable when you've been trained to fear rejection. You carry that training into adulthood. Unconsciously, you over-explain yourself. You apologize for existing with preferences. You feel bad for resting, for saying no, for not answering messages fast enough. You treat every boundary like an offense. You are not weak for this. You are conditioned. You were programmed to feel responsible for everyone's emotions except your own. You became the fixer, the peacekeeper, the one who absorbs tension so others can stay comfortable. But all that absorbing has a cost. It erases you. That's why when you finally start setting boundaries, it feels wrong at first. It feels selfish. It feels cold. Not because it is, but because your nervous system confuses discomfort with danger. You're not doing anything wrong. You're just breaking the script. The guilt you feel isn't proof that you're cruel. It's proof that you're healing from emotional conditioning. It's the echo of an old lesson you no longer need to obey. You were never meant to be endlessly available. You were never meant to hold everyone's weight. You were never meant to apologize for needing rest, silence, or distance. The world trained you to see guilt as the price of peace. But real peace doesn't demand guilt. Real peace asks for honesty, for courage, for boundaries. So when you start feeling guilty for saying no, pause and remember, that feeling isn't your truth. It's your training. And training can be unlearned. Because the version of you that always said yes was just trying to survive. The version of you that's learning to say no is finally trying to live. The moment you start saying no, the world around you shifts. Not because you've become difficult, but because you've stopped being easy to use. At first, you think people will understand. You think they'll respect your boundaries, even if they don't like them. But that's not what happens, is it? The air changes. The tone changes. Suddenly, you're not kind anymore. You're cold. You're not helpful. You're selfish. You're not available. You're distant. What they really mean is, you stopped serving my comfort. Your no interrupts a system they depended on. It breaks the unspoken agreement that your energy was theirs to borrow. You can feel it, the shift in their eyes when you stop explaining, the way their voice hardens when you choose peace over pleasing, the way their silence grows heavier when they realize they can no longer manipulate you through guilt. They don't get upset because your boundaries are wrong. They get upset because your boundaries are working. You're no longer bendable, no longer predictable, no longer available to absorb what they refuse to face in themselves. When you stop saying yes to everything, you become a mirror. And mirrors make people uncomfortable because they reflect what others don't want to see. Your strength exposes their dependence. Your independence exposes their control. Your peace exposes their chaos. They'll call you changed, and they'll mean it as an insult. But it's actually the highest compliment. You have changed. You stopped living to be chosen. You started living to be true. They'll try to pull you back through guilt, through nostalgia, through fear, through emotional blackmail dressed as love. They'll remind you of everything you used to do for them, how easy you once were to convince. They'll test you, just to see if your no still wavers like it used to. But you don't owe them the old version of you. You don't have to keep performing the role they fell in love with, the role where your worth depended on your compliance. You are allowed to evolve beyond their expectations. When you start saying no, some people will leave, but pay attention to who stays, because those who stay and still respect your limits are the ones who love you for who you are, not what you give. They'll adjust, they'll listen, they'll learn, because real connection doesn't fear boundaries. It grows from them. And for the ones who try to make you feel guilty, see them clearly. They're not reacting to your cruelty. They're reacting to your clarity. They can no longer manipulate the space between your kindness and your guilt. So let them be uncomfortable. Let them misunderstand you. Let them call you whatever they need to, so they can avoid facing themselves. You don't need to defend your boundaries to people who profit from crossing them. Your peace will always irritate those who depended on your chaos. Your no will always offend those who benefited from your exhaustion. But don't shrink. Don't explain. Don't soften to fit back into the version of you that made them comfortable. This is the turning point, where you stop choosing guilt over growth, where you stop mistaking other people's disappointment for your responsibility, where you realize it's not your job to make everyone happy. It's your job to stay whole. They will say you've changed, and they'll be right. You finally have. You don't overcome guilt by arguing with it. You overcome it by standing still and watching it lose power. Pause. Breathe. Don't rush to fix what isn't broken just because someone else is uncomfortable. You've spent years bending, shrinking, apologizing. And for what? For peace that never lasted. For approval that always came with conditions. For validation that evaporated the moment you needed something in return. That version of you, the one who said yes to avoid being misunderstood, they were just trying to survive, but you're not surviving anymore. You're awakening. So when guilt creeps in, remember, it's just the echo of your old obedience. It's the mind's attempt to pull you back into familiar pain. You're not guilty. You're growing. Stop explaining your boundaries to people committed to crossing them. Stop softening your truth just to stay likable. Stop confusing silence with peace and exhaustion with loyalty. You don't need to defend your calm. You don't need to justify your absence. You don't need to prove that you're still good. Your boundary doesn't need to sound gentle to be valid. It doesn't need to make sense to anyone but you. It's not up for debate. It's a declaration. I choose me this time. When they say you're acting different, smile. You are. You're acting free. You're acting whole. You're acting like someone who finally realized that their energy is sacred. Standing firm isn't about building walls. It's about keeping your foundation intact. It's not about shutting people out. It's about not letting them rearrange you. You can love people and still choose distance. You can care deeply and still say no. You can forgive someone and never let them close again. Strength doesn't mean you don't feel guilt. It means you don't obey it. It means you sit with it, breathe through it, and remember that guilt is not morality. It's memory. It's the shadow of old programming, trying to survive in a new reality. So how do you stand firm? You stop arguing with your peace. You stop letting every emotion become a debate with your worth. You let people misunderstand you. You let them talk. You let them call you cold, arrogant, selfish. And you keep standing anyway. Because what's at stake isn't their opinion. It's your life force. It's your clarity. It's your right to exist without being drained. You don't owe anyone your constant access. You don't owe anyone explanations for your healing. You don't owe anyone an endless version of you that bends to keep them comfortable. Stand in your truth, not with aggression, but with certainty, quiet certainty, the kind that doesn't need to prove itself anymore. You are allowed to protect your time without guilt. You are allowed to choose silence over chaos. You are allowed to prioritize your peace, even when it disappoints others. Because the ones meant for you will never need you to break yourself to prove your care. They'll understand. They'll adjust. They'll meet you at the new level. And the ones who can't, let them fall away. That's not loss. That's alignment. Boundaries are not rejection, they're direction. They guide your energy toward what's real. They separate love from dependency, respect from control, truth from guilt. So when guilt knocks, don't open the door. Let it stand outside and fade. Because the moment you stop apologizing for existing, you become untouchable. You don't have to feel guilty for standing tall. You don't have to shrink to be loved. You don't have to explain peace to people who thrive on chaos. You've spent enough years saying yes. This chapter begins with no, and no is sacred. There comes a moment when the guilt no longer works. When it still whispers, but you don't flinch. When you hear the old voices, the ones that say, "You're being selfish. You've changed. You used to be so kind." And for the first time, you don't rush to prove them wrong. You just breathe. You just stand. You just let the silence stretch. Because you finally understand, their comfort is not your responsibility. That's freedom. Freedom begins the day you stop negotiating your peace, the day you stop explaining your healing, the day you realize you never needed permission to protect your soul. The guilt fades, not because it disappears, but because you see it for what it always was. A trick. A leash made of fear and love, twisted together. A way to keep you small enough to be safe and safe enough to be controlled. The people who love you right will never guilt you for setting yourself free. They'll thank you for teaching them how to do the same. Because when you stop feeling guilty for saying no, you give others permission to stop apologizing for existing. You become proof that peace can coexist with strength, that softness can protect itself, that love can have limits without losing depth. The world taught you that boundaries push people away. But now you know the truth. Boundaries don't destroy love. They refine it. They filter out the ones who only stayed because you didn't know how to say no. When you stop feeling sorry, everything changes. You stop chasing people who drain you. You stop explaining peace to those committed to chaos. You stop begging to be understood, because you finally understand yourself. The guilt fades, the noise quiets, the body unclenches, and in that stillness, you feel something unfamiliar, freedom without fear. You realize that the people who truly matter never needed you to break yourself to prove your love. And the ones who did, they were never really with you. They were with the version of you that made their life easier. Let them go. Let them talk. Let them misunderstand you. You have nothing left to prove, because you are no longer trying to be seen. You're learning to see yourself. You're no longer waiting for permission. You've already given it. You're no longer asking if it's okay to rest. You're resting. You've carried guilt long enough. You've confused fear for empathy long enough. You've mistaken survival for love long enough. It's time. Time to stop feeling sorry for protecting your energy. Time to stop apologizing for choosing peace. Time to stop flinching when your boundaries make noise. Time to stop carrying the blame that was never yours. Because you were never the villain for saying no. You were the healer learning to finally say yes to yourself. And that's what freedom feels like. Quiet, steady, unapologetic. You don't owe guilt another moment. You don't owe pain another explanation. You don't owe anyone the old version of you. You've earned this peace. You've earned this clarity. You've earned this silence. Stop feeling sorry for finally being free.